Today, we're unpacking a pretty fascinating and honestly kind of terrifying topic: the psychological and systemic forces that drive corporate scandals. We're going to break down the actual anatomy of a scandal to really understand how ethical compromises happen in the real world. But more importantly, we'll look at exactly how we can build our own moral muscle to stop them in their tracks.
Let's kick things off with a fundamental question, one that has haunted the corporate world for decades. How do seemingly good people end up doing incredibly bad things at work? Behavioral ethics tells us that compromise is rarely just one singular cataclysmic moment of moral failure. It's way more complicated than that. Cynthia Cooper, the famous WorldCom whistleblower, perfectly captures this. As her quote here highlights, ethical failure isn't usually a sudden leap off a cliff. Instead, it's a slow, highly deceptive descent. We don't just wake up one Tuesday and decide, hey, I think I'll become a criminal today. No, we lose our footing, literally one small step at a time.
Okay, let's quickly look at our roadmap for this explainer. We're hitting 5 main stops today. First, the slippery slope. Second, the psychology of compromise. Third, systemic drivers. Fourth, the toll of moral injury. And finally, giving voice to values. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. The slippery slope.
This whole process begins with something called incrementalism. You've probably heard it called the boiling frog syndrome. It's basically the unconscious lowering of our ethical standards over time through really small changes in behavior. Think about it. Minor transgressions, like maybe fudging a tiny number on an expense report, can eventually snowball into massive securities fraud. Why? Because our brain slowly normalizes the bad behavior until it just feels entirely routine.
And that slow slide brings us right to cognitive dissonance. When our actions contradict our self-image, our belief that we're a good person, our brain's internal alarm system goes off. Specifically, a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex detects this friction and it creates a massive cognitive load. It's super uncomfortable. But rather than just changing the bad behavior to fix the tension, we usually end up rationalizing the behavior to protect our ego.
So, this intense psychological tension triggers what we call ethical fading. Think of it as a really dangerous blind spot. It's when the moral dimensions of a choice completely vanish from your decision-making radar. They just disappear, replaced by a pure focus on winning, or maybe just operational feasibility and profitability. You literally stop seeing the ethics of the situation altogether. Wild, right?
Moving on to Section 2, the psychology of compromise.
Under extreme pressure, our own minds turn into a battleground. We face this fierce internal tug-of-war between our want self and our should self. In the heat of the moment, the highly pragmatic want self, which is entirely focused on immediate relief, survival, and just getting things done, frequently completely overpowers the principled should self, which is the part of us guided by our core long-term values.
Which brings us to Section 3, systemic drivers.
Because look, individual psychology is really only half the story here. Organizational systems often act as the toxic catalyst. Unethical cultures absolutely thrive on weak oversight, rewarding pure results no matter how you got them, and fostering a deep fear of retribution. On the flip side, ethical cultures embed compliance, they encourage open dialogue, and they rely on leaders who actually model ethical behavior. Environments that prioritize totally unrealistic targets, like Wells Fargo's infamous 8 is Great campaign, can completely shatter a person's moral compass. And we've seen this play out in the real world time and time again. Back at Wells Fargo, those unrealistic sales goals directly led to employees opening 3.5 million fake accounts. 3.5 million! At Theranos, severe intimidation tactics and legal threats were weaponized to silence whistleblower Tyler Schultz. And take super lobbyist Jack Abramoff. He used cognitive biases like moral equilibrium to justify massive political corruption. These real-world examples prove that when accountability is weak and results are literally everything, employees are backed into corners. They have to either compromise their ethics or face severe retaliation.
Now for Section 4, the toll of moral injury.
The fallout from these corporate scandals isn't just financial. It causes profound, real human trauma. Now, there is a critical difference here between moral distress and moral injury. Moral distress is that temporary discomfort you feel from systemic constraints, like you know the right thing to do, but you're blocked by a lack of resources or power. But moral injury? That is much deeper. It's a persistent, long-term psychological distress stemming from a past violation of your own conscience. It deeply damages a person's sense of identity and can lead to intense feelings of guilt, shame, and a really heavy sense of betrayal by authority figures.
Finally, Section 5, Giving voice to values.
All right, we've diagnosed the root causes, so it's time to introduce a practical framework to actually fight back. To truly equip ourselves, we have to completely shift our paradigm. We need to stop just philosophizing and asking what is the right thing to do, and instead focus purely on implementation. We need to ask, how do we get the right thing done?
Getting the right thing done requires a fully integrated approach. Looking at REST's framework of moral development, we can see a clear, required progression. It moves from moral awareness to judgment to intent, and then finally to action. But here's the kicker. To turn that ethical intent into visible, concrete workplace action, we actually have to create and practice behavioral scripts.
So how do we operationalize this in real life? We do it by following the 4 steps of the Giving Voice to Values, or GVV, action plan. Step 1, identify the rationalizations you're inevitably going to hear. Excuses like, hey, everyone is doing it. Step 2, find your levers of influence and identify your potential allies. Step 3, actually script out your specific response. And step 4, rehearse it out loud. By doing this, you preemptively build up your moral muscle. That way, standing up for your ethics becomes a practiced, natural reflex rather than a panicked, last-minute reaction. But what happens when all those internal frameworks completely fail? Well, whistleblowing is the ultimate, final safeguard for institutional integrity. It's not easy, though. It requires immense personal credibility, getting early legal counsel, and relying on incredibly strong personal support networks. It's a path fraught with huge professional and personal risks, requiring strategic planning and a heavy reliance on legal protections just to survive the inevitable backlash.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to really reflect on. When the rationalizations start flying, the stakes are sky high, and the systems around you are basically demanding compromise. Are you truly prepared to get the right thing done? If the pressure was suddenly on you, would you have the moral muscle to give voice to your values?